I'm Willy Bearden. Welcome to Dialogue. Today, this is a real special treat for me. I'm talking to a good friend of mine and someone who will be your good friend. If you don't know him, he'll be your good friend at the end of this hour. We're talking to John Kilzer today. He's a well-known songwriter, a well-known citizen of Memphis, and former basketball great, still a basketball great guitar player, and I would say one of the people who has reached out and helped people with addiction issues over the past few years, and so he's done so much for that community, and we're just going to have a wide-ranging talk about that today. John, welcome.
Oh, it's so glad to be here, Willie. So great to see you, buddy.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see you, and we normally get to sit down and talk and play some guitars and things, and today I'm really excited,
yeah,
you know, for you to be playing today. We're going to talk about a number of things. You know, I was telling you earlier that the first time I think I ever saw you play guitar at this bar called Uncle Ernie's. There were two bars kind of attached, Uncle Ernie's and Across the Tracks. Mm-hmm. Maybe you were Across the Tracks.
Actually, I think I had a pup tent right between the two of them.
Maybe I was there too. I do remember spending a lot of time.
Yeah, they were connected and right there by campus, and it was that was a lot of fun in those places there.
Yeah, that was 1977, 78.
It was. It was.
Yeah. Okay, you were at the University of Memphis. You were at Memphis State, actually. You'd gotten a scholarship, a basketball scholarship. Tell me kind of what led to that and what made you decide to come to Memphis State?
Well, I lived in Jackson, and which is just an hour away. It was a tough decision. I could have really gone anywhere. I was Highschool All American, could have gone pretty much any college I wanted to. At that time, though, Willie, you'll probably remember the WKNO would play the recast of the games at 10 o'clock.
Right.
And, you know, my parents at that time were a little bit older, and they could see the games there and wouldn't have to travel, and that was huge kind of in my decision. You know, even though I was leaving home, you never really leave everything when you go. You always leave a piece of your heart there. Right. And so I wanted them to be able to watch that. And plus, I had become a very good friend of Bill Cooks, who played on the team, and they helped recruit me there, and I really liked Bill and his game. And there was just, you know, I mean, the times I went on my, you know, you go on all your trips. I visited Alabama, I visited Florida, and then I visited Mississippi State. Mm-hmm. And there's just something that I still, being in Memphis all these years, there's a vibrancy. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but there's a crispness, there's a real dialectic in Memphis, of tension and energy. Yeah. It's funky. And at the time then, just like it is now, I mean, Tiger Hoops was you know, it's it, you know, and so I'm still so you know, I still keep up with the team, and I was honored recently to get to meet Coach Passner, you know, and the players, and when they play, I vicariously play too, you know, and you're always a Tiger, man, when you're a Tiger. So there was a lot of things about being close to home, about just this kind of neat, kind of funky groove that's, you know, this jiveness that's happening here in Memphis. It's still happening.
Yeah. So these are seemingly two different worlds, though, and I don't think a lot of people, or to my knowledge, a lot of people don't really have their feet in both worlds. I mean, here you had your feet firmly in the basketball world. Mm-hmm. You know, you were a high school All American. That's a big deal. Then you had your feet somewhere in the arts. I don't think you knew quite what you were doing, but had you always been a reader?
Oh yeah, my mother was a bookmobile driver, and my dad was an engineer on the railroad, so I was kind of got ink and diesel in my blood, you know. Plus, I was probably born blowing about a 1.5 on you know, if you had taken a blood alcohol content of me. I was, you know, my dad was a serious railroad man who drank all the time, and so half diesel, half ink. And so my mother read all the time, and I remember riding with her on the bookmobile all around West Tennessee. I remember going over, I don't know if you remember, there was of course they've taken it down, but there was a bridge that went over into Savannah.
Okay.
A very, very narrow bridge, and I can still remember going over that narrow bridge in a bookmobile with my mom, and she read, and so I always kind of read and found narratives and just the kind of meta world that you can go into through fiction and poetry. So I was always allured to that. And then the kind of just the drone of diesel engines, and I remember riding on trains with my dad, and just at night, you know, kind of just going through the darkness on a big diesel train, and so kind of weaving those together is what I did.
So you came to Memphis State, and how was it leaving home for you? I mean, you know, I think it's hard for anyone to leave home, but did you, were you ready to leave, or was there a different pull for you?
Well, you know, that's digging down into some pretty dark stuff there, because, you know, I mean, it was, I didn't know all this at the time. I just thought that it was just the growing up. But, you know, my dad was an alcoholic. He was just he was a good man, but he had this disease of alcoholism, and my oldest brother did too. And I was like the very youngest, and there's a lot of years between me and my sister that was old. So I was kind of you know, alone a lot.
Yeah.
And I didn't just realize the dysfunctional dynamic that was going on. You know, you just make do, and I mean, they were loving parents, and they did the best they could, and you know, my mom just sort of made do dealing with you know, our oldest son and husband dealing with this stuff. And so when I left, you know, I just kind of just was almost kind of like, how do I reorientate myself? And it was you know, you go through all the sort of things that you do when you're leaving home and going to college and stuff. And unfortunately, something that I had done, as I thought, just sort of as a casual thing in high school, you know, namely drinking. When I got to Memphis, you know, as I look back on it, I didn't know at the time. At the time, I just thought, you know, I was having a good time and just doing what people do. But I mean, I was pretty much, coming as a freshman, I was full-blown alcoholic when I was a freshman in college. A lot of these realizations didn't come to me, and you know, till much later.
Sure.
And you know, that's why when I mentioned earlier that when the Tigers play, I'm literally, when I say vicariously, I'm really out there with them, because I have a lot of misgivings about not being present in my life when I was playing ball. You know, you got to be present to win in life, and I just wasn't. Yeah. And so, you know, and so I dealt with it the best I could, and then, but to, you know, to answer your question, I really, my freshman year, just stopped going to class. Just everything got a little, you know, more and more out of bounds, or you start a little bit off center and then it widens out. Yeah. And I'm saying this to say this. Many folks, you know of Spook Murphy, and as a great man. Well, let me tell you what he did for me that just still amazes me. He saw something in me that I didn't in myself. After, you know, my 4 years, I had like all these F's, and I was gonna, you know, I had passion for English, and so I was really wanting to go, which I did eventually get my master's in English, but I had to go back and take all these classes over. And Coach Murphy called me in his office, and he said, look, if you will, I know what you're trying to do. He says, we'll take care of you. If you'll do this and do it and go back, I can kind of see in your spirit that you really want to do this. We'll help you do it. And if he hadn't of, you know, you think of these things in your life. You and I were talking about this earlier. Things that at the time might not seem like that big a deal, but the trajectory of my life, when someone showed some faith in me. Sure. And so I went on and had to spend basically 2 years going back and taking these classes that I'd flunked out, and then went straight into the master's program and got my master's degree, and ended up teaching. Basketball players were in my class, and so a lot of this stuff comes full circle, you know. Sure, yeah.
So how has that experience, I mean, it paints everything. It is who you are. It's part of your DNA. how has that been realized in your art, in your music?
Okay. Well, you just, it's the thing is if you're really going to be, and sometimes I just kind of have to separate that a little bit. There's, are you going to really be an artist in your music, or are you going to kind of just do what's sort of expected of you? You know? And for me, the thing about being an artist is you can acquire a certain basic toolbox of skill sets that will allow you, for my particular medium, to write a song. And you can actually write pretty good songs, and everything, just by sort of licking your finger and putting it up and seeing what are the vibes going on.
Right.
But you mentioned art, and to really, I think, be an artist means that you are it's beholding upon you to go to those places that typically we don't, that typically that we can kind of manage to navigate through life without going to those places. But it's those places that we don't want to go to. It's kind of like that's where the real treasure trove is. It's in all the nursery rhymes. It's the little girl that's the daughter of the king who loses her little golden ball into the water, and it's like, oh, I don't know. And then of course a frog comes out and says, look, this is where the stuff is. You got to jump into it. And that's why I love William Sloane Coffin's quote so much. He says, I love the fearlessness of faith. He says, first you jump and then you grow wings, And so you can be a great musician and songwriter sans wings.
Yeah. Sure.
You can just kind of, or you can be a great, you can be a great artist who never has ever heard, but who really goes into that stuff to where that kind of has the, in the flaming swords, it's like you're not going to get back into this garden. Sure. But artists say, oh yeah, I am. I'm gonna deal with the swords and go back in there.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I know that you honor, your talent and your craft, and probably there's craft and then talent over here, right? I mean, you've worked your craft to where you've had songs cut by many people, but do those other things creep in? Do they come out, the whole of that guitar?
They do, yeah. They really do, and they come out as images. Images or the sort of narrative, I think, that really, if you look at really like Dylan, to me who's just like there's Dylan, there's everyone else. Yeah. Like Blood on the Tracks. Even the title of that track was when he was really going through some profound heartbreak, and the honesty of those songs. Which came out in these images, Idiot Wind, just the way that a real artist, in whatever the medium they're in too, they might change mediums, they might change colors, but typically though, Willie, I think that if you're willing, I think God honors someone to where if they're going to actually make this journey, even maybe if they're not really equipped for it, God sort of honors it, and you come up and you just really try to be true to it, and you just sort of and then you let it go. That's one thing that I've never really, all the songs, I've never really taken them all that seriously to where they're like something that needs to be like put in amber or anything, and basically they're kind of like I name them and I let them go. To me, I'm always working on songs, and those are the things that are important because I can come back to them, and it's a parallel universe to where stuff's going on, and it's like I never, when you see the movie and you see the end, and that movie's done, and so to me it's kind of like I'll always have 3 or 4 songs, and I'm not a good piano player, but I play enough at the piano to where I can even mistakes sound good,
Yeah, sure, yeah. Hey, that's great. So I guess this is a good time maybe to hear a song. Can you play me your favorite song or one of your favorite songs?
Okay. We were talking about my dad.
Yeah.
And this is a song actually that was cut. Roseanne Cash cut this song. And you know, I told you about the time that I was sort of riding through the darkness on a train.
Yeah.
And sort of took that and turned it into a song. It's called 707. Last night, awakened from a dream with the headlights blazing from a train, and my old man was leaning on the throttle and the brake man were passing around a bottle. That full moon was dancing through the trees. That 707 was starting to breeze. It said, so I turned around, tried to get back to sleep, but when the ceiling started to creak and the plaster started to crumble and the dishes started to tumble, I hit the floor, headed for the door. That 707 was starting to roar. It said, well, the next thing you know, I was in a caboose, rolling dice and drinking juice, when my old man blew in like a hurricane. Lord have mercy, who's driving this? Well, last night, could have sworn I was asleep, but when I woke up, there was mud on my feet, my head was pounding like a driving wheel, and I felt things never thought I'd feel, so I pulled back the covers, took a glance, the 707 was starting to dance. It said,
Oh, that's great. That's great. I've heard you play that part. I love that.
Thank
I
you.
love that. I mean, do you feel where you were when you've heard that? I mean, does that bring it back?
I mean, yeah, it was pretty much a transcription of that experience. You know?
Yeah.
I was very, very young, and you know, it just. And trains, you know, the trains still, there's such a mystique about trains. And, you know, you'll hear them at 3 or 4 in the morning, and it's just, there's something pronounced about it, something mystical, and there always will be. You know.
Yeah. So at this time, you know, you had obviously gotten better at playing guitar. You know, were you really thinking seriously about you know, being a songwriter or being a performer at that time? Were you doing more and more of that?
Well, what had happened is that, like around that time that I saw you there, it was Across the Tracks or Uncle Ernie's or something like that. I was just kind of getting to where I could play some Dylan songs and knew a couple of 3 chords. But the real moment in my life was when I met Teenie Hodges, and I was living in the athletic dorm, and I had like a pawn shop guitar. And he came in the room and just kind of, you know, I mean, you know, he was, I guess the door was open, and he came in, and something really magical and mystical happened, and he sat down. And
Did you know who he was? I mean, were you aware?
He was just an enigmatic figure, you
Yeah.
know, that would just always kind of just bigger than life, you know, even though he was a very small guy. But he just, you know, something happened. It was like that, as though he passed his hands over, you know me, or something like that, to where it wasn't necessarily that it was any kind of like Robert Johnson sort of experience, but what it was is that it changed my emotional attitude about music, and gave me a sense that this is just it's not so much, I mean, because I never was ever, Teenie was in a class of his own as guitar, and his imprimatur, no one is stamped, and no one ever do anything like that. So I mean, I play enough guitar to get by, but what it did change was just my frame of reference as far as to this is something that is a way of living. It's just not something that you do. And I had a sort of fearlessness and courage from that time that I was just going to do this, which is very odd, you know, because I'm really kind of an introvert. And just started going out and playing, and you know, like you mentioned before, it was Larry Raspberry, bless his heart, had let me get up and play when he was doing his Alone and Unashamed, you know, which is great, you know, by himself, and so he would let me, you know, and I'm sure it was like, oh no, here's this guy again, but I mean, I would go up and play. And then I got a gig at Prince Mongo's.
Right, okay,
Prince Mongo let me in there to play. And I just started, you know, just doing it because it was, to me, it was sort of sung literature, you know. And then when you really, it's important to like, you know, the folks that you start modeling. And I'd already been reading a lot of great poetry, and you know, just reading Faulkner and realized the importance of metaphor. You know, and how really great songs are just sort of just moving metaphors around and let this kind of creative tension between images, you know, and not be so inclined to try to explain everything. You know? Because narrative has enough explanation, and you know, intrinsic to narrative are metaphors that lend themselves to a good storyline, you know.
When were you bold enough to think you could write a song?
Well, you know what happened, I tell you, it was kind of, I had met Keith Sykes around the same time that I met with Larry, and Keith started actually hanging out with Keith and kind of working the door for gigs that he would do, and watched kind of the insides of the way that great songs were written, because Keith was a great songwriter and a crafts person. And started, and so just kind of, I would go on the road with him and work the door and kind of just through osmosis, or chaosmosis, however you want to say, but just kind of being around him. So I started writing songs, and then Keith, there was an opportunity at Ardent to go in, and just, you know, there was some open time, and then Keith and Hampton were buds because they'd worked together on records, and it was sort of like, well, let's just kind of get John in and put these tracks down because we got some time. And then what happened, strangely enough, was that these demos, which I had just started writing songs, and I had a batch of these things, and they started really garnering a lot of really major interest. Jody Stevens took them to New York and Los Angeles, and they're like right at the time when I'd gotten my position at Memphis State teaching English. I bought a Harris Tweed because I love Faulkner.
Oh, yeah, there you
know,
go.
I had a Harris Tweed, you know, and then a pipe, you know, and I won't go with all that pipe stuff. But anyway, so then I started, this interest started being driven about these demos. And Mary Martin, who was with Warner Brothers, you know, she was Van Morrison's manager. She came into town and had some great stories about Van Morrison. She's Leonard Cohen's manager, too. She was with Warner Brothers, and then Brian Ettenauer from A&M, and then Tom Zutaut from Geffen, and so there began a bidding war for me to like sign this deal. And Jim Zumwalt, the attorney out of Nashville, was able to kind of, he knew the nomenclature on all that stuff. And so at this point I was like kind of, this is odd, this is weird, fun, all the sort of things. And it's probably not the most logical criteria to sign with a label, but I signed with Geffen because that was the last label that John Lennon was on. And so I said, well, you know, I'm gonna, you know, I like that Lennon guy, I'll go with Geffen too. And at the time they had this, they were known as kind of a singer-songwriter label. This is right before Guns N' Roses and Nirvana and all that. So that's when things just really, really, in a short amount of time, accelerated to almost warp speed.
Did that intimidate you? I mean, were you, how were you looking in the mirror? You know, were you going, oh, I'm not ready, or were you saying, I'm absolutely ready, bring it on? I was kind of,
you know, I had a bit of a dégagé attitude about it. I was sort of like, bring it on, you know, and I had, you know, at that time, you know, my buddies, Dave Smith, Harry Peel, Jack Holder,
Yeah.
they were playing in the band, and it was
Yeah.
like, hey, you know, let's kind of like, let's get a tour bus and let's go tour, and which we did. And the record, I mean, just kind of went, you know,
Right.
just started kind of charting really fast. So we immediately were out. I mean, really, and this is like, it seems to me now looking back and like that.
Yeah, sure.
Then we're on a tour bus,
Right.
you know, doing major tour of the Moody Blues, Little Feat, and then, you know, in amongst that time, things that were, you know, as that accelerated, you can imagine the other things that accelerated too with my own personal behavior.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you know, everybody, you know, here you are. I mean, I was, you know, clinically introspective and you know, introverted. Mm-hmm. And you kind of, you know, immediately you start doing things to anesthetize and medicate that allow you to do all the things that you had to do.
You have to be
But,
emboldened
you know, I mean,
by something, right?
Yeah, you do. You have to be emboldened.
Yeah.
You definitely. So I was, you know, I was like, bring it on, and we'll do it. But you know, was I emotionally prepared, or was I emotionally mature enough for it? No, probably wasn't. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I did, to the point to where it started affecting my spiritual DNA. You know, you can maintain a sort of levity and purpose in life to a certain point, to where, but when you start really kind of, you know, hearing those train whistles in the middle of the night and wondering what that is, when you start really doing spiritual inventory on a lot of this stuff, then you nurture and you start equipping yourself to deal with the more things that are wider, deeper, you know, and so I was, for a couple of years there, I wrote it pretty hard, and then I shut down, you know, I shut it all down, and basically did the second record, which was my most honest, I think, record until this last record, Hideaway. Right. And basically then just said, you know, I'm out of this stuff, you know.
Yeah. Was it, I mean, was it killing you? Was it killing you in a number of ways?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was killing me. That's what I was talking about spiritually. It was killing my spirit. Yeah. And so, I mean, there's things worse than death, you know. I mean, I was you know, I could have maintained it, but I remember distinctly I was in Paris and had gone to the cemetery there where Jim Morrison is buried, and they debased it, and it's really, you know, written on the tombstone, Morrison lives, and cats everywhere, and the sun was going down, and I went and saw where it was, but I just had this feeling like I was just really I mean, I felt like literally my soul was going to die, that I might be able to maintain life, but I would have been dead, you know. So anyway, I was trying to get out of this cemetery, and there was a tomb there of a guy named Allan Kardec, who I found out later was the father of spiritualism. And so as the sun was going down, there's a ritual of these folks that were a part of his sort of cult, is they would all be in dark robes and hoods, and they would carry candles up to this guy. So I'm trying to get out of the cemetery.
Really?
I already feel like I'm dying. There's this like line of these hooded folks carrying candles up to this guy, spiritualist, and I said, well, I got to get the hell out of this place. And so I went and just kind of basically found myself at Notre Dame Cathedral, and had a very, very profound, you know, experience there, and realized that I've got to some sort of way get out of this situation that I'm in here, is without as much collateral damage, you know, and get myself into another situation, because I mean, I knew that I could always write songs. Yeah. And I had seen the sort of life to where you get, you know, that you become sort of star and all that stuff, and I'd seen that, and I lived that. Yeah. And to the fullest. I mean, I had a good time. Yeah. I mean, I didn't leave any dregs in the cup at all. Yeah. But then, you know, when you start having these existential, you know, I've learned that you can't waste a good crisis. You know, a crisis is a time where good things can happen, or you can just repattern yourself, because a crisis is like it's just as it's a physical law that a storm will always move into a low pressure system. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a spiritual law too, that the Holy Spirit will move into a low pressure system. So I was, you know, that's why I mean by don't waste a good crisis. So definitely I was in a low pressure system, and something moved into me to where I had to do something. And I mean, and of course, I'd like to say that you know, after that it was happily ever after, but it wasn't, you know. But what it did is it allowed me to relocate and completely disengage from that situation that was going to eventually just, I mean, I saw what it was like. I mean, I took it as far as I could see, kind of on top of the mountain. I said, well, this is what it looks like.
Yep.
I think I'll go back down into the valley for a while, you know. And mountains are all relative anyway. You know?
Yeah, yeah, that is true. You know, how was it hard for you to? Because I'm sure you were thinking for these years, oh gosh, I've got a record deal now. This is, you know. People would kill for this. Mm-hmm. Everybody, this is kind of the, you know, especially in Memphis, everybody wants a deal. Everybody wants money to go into the studio and spend all the time they need to cut a record, and everybody wants to go out on the road. Did you feel like you were kind of, did you feel like you had broken through, or did you feel like, you know, gosh, this hasn't worked out, what do I do now?
I felt like I'd broken through.
Yeah.
And that I had kind of experienced it, you know, that bit of it that I had. You know, I mean, the thing is kind of going back to what we were talking earlier about, Willie, is, I mean, as far as, you know, the difference between being sort of a performer and an artist, and an artist maybe art with a large A or a smaller A.
Yeah.
Because it didn't take me long to figure out that if I was going to maintain this, then what I was going to have to do is write songs that would be designed to get airplay, that would be designed to be performed in concert, that would be, you know, ad nauseum, on and on and on.
Yeah.
And I figured out pretty early that, I mean, the whole thing about, I mean, even the first record that was a commercial success is the songs are atypical. You know, I mean, they're not, my style has never been sort of, you know, something that is pop. You know, the reason something is pop is because it's popular. It's because a lot of people kind of like it. And that kind of goes against the grain of what, to me, a song is. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, that to me a song is to go into these sort of places that you typically wouldn't go. Yeah. So I had in that sort of, when I mentioned existential crisis, it was also an artistic crisis, because you know, now that being said, there are some artists that are able to do both, but very few. Right. And most of them started out atypical, like Dylan. I mean, you know, times are changing. You try to put that in a modern context. But there's some that's almost on a handful. You know, there's Leonard Cohen, there's Van Morrison, Stevie Wonder was you know. But those are those are rare. Typically, what you have to do is to subscribe to a pattern and to a sort of conformity to where you're constantly trying to stay popular, but also be an artist. And I had 2 years span there to where I was like, thank you very next. Sure. You know. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that may be the greatest word, you know, in our lexicon. There is next. You know, just okay. Yeah. Done this, next. You know, and with people, situations, and everything. Yeah. Sometimes it's just you need to say next. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say. That being said, there was actually later on about a 3-year time to where I was in I had enrolled in the seminary, and then I relapsed, and so I literally just disenrolled and went and started working at a coffee shop, to where a gentleman found me there pouring coffee and signed me to a writer's deal. And so for 3 years, I spent all my time in Nashville and Los Angeles actually learning the craft, completely kind of going against the grain of what I just said.
Right.
Writing with great writers that do exactly what that. So it was almost what I was kind of like at one time poo-pooing. I was actually learning the real, almost kind of what, you know, what they were doing on the Brill building and all of that.
Right.
And so, you know, I can actually, you know, be of two minds on this thing and say, but during that 3 years when I wrote with great songwriters, I learned about the crafts of songwriting.
Yeah.
But what it was, and I mean, I got some cuts. I mean, Trace Atkins cut and things like that. So, but what it was is like you go in, and it's like, okay, well, we want a song that sounds like this, that this person's looking for a song. And you write in 2-hour slots, and so there's a real discipline that as an artist, I loved that discipline.
Right.
For 3 years, you know.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
sure, and I completely understand that. I was talking to somebody the other night, and they said, well, for me, my creativity comes from events. Something has to happen. I fall in love, I fall out of love, somebody passes away, my kid does, whatever, but there always has to be an event. And I said, well, that's fine, but you can't summon up these life-changing events, you know, if you are there and you have to produce. And I think, you know, in my career, I've had to, you know, somebody point the finger at me and, okay, do this and have it finished by this time. And so, yeah, that idea of having enough of the craft to where you can just turn it on and turn it off is a good thing to know. To know, yeah. Maybe not a good thing to live, but a good thing to know. If you know how to do that, then you can do it anytime. You can, yeah. And I mean, and in your work too, I mean, as a writer, both a writer and a photographer, you know the importance of images, you know, and you know how to move images around, and you know when you know what image that might, you know, the thing about being an artist is that you notice things typically that other people don't notice. It's there for everyone to see, and it's sort of like, you know. Every day is a mystical experience, you know, and it's like you don't have to kind of have this sort of profound epiphany that there's epiphanies all around us, you know, and so you just kind of I think you can hone that. It's like Ezra Pound kind of has to say you need to get better at your curiosity. And someone would think that curiosity is just something sort of natural instinct, but if you hone your curiosity, you see there's an artistic element involved in that too. So, every truly creative person I know has a very well-developed sense of curiosity. You know, they just want to know. You know, and it may not be that they want to be an expert in this, or this, but they know a little something about it, and they're interested in people. Yeah. And I think getting out of yourself enough, you know, to show that interest, you know, that really pushes you along as an artist, I think. I think so too. And it's hard to teach that, but I think sometimes that those things that are hard to teach are just things that people, once it's said out loud, people go, okay, I didn't think about that, but yeah, I need to know that. All right, so let's hear some more music. I'd like for you to play me something that you wrote that you maybe weren't inspired about, and but something that made you some money or gave you some satisfaction in, you know, writing with somebody. Okay.
Sometimes I see you standing by the river. I see the reason God made the sun, and sometimes I see you laughing over something. I hear the sweetest song ever sung, and there's no way that I know of to say how much I love you. If I was rain, fall all around you, follow your footsteps, lie on your skin. And if I was a river, I'd fall from your mountain, run by your footsteps so you could jump in. If I could hold the sea in my heart and hands, I'd pour love on you like only heaven can. If I was rain, if I was water, I couldn't fall any harder for you, baby, 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 for you. Sit down beside me, watch the fire dying, let a kiss be all we have to say, and lay down beside me, soft as summer roses, let the night fly silently away, and there's no word that I've heard of says how much I love you. If I was rain, fall all around you, cover your footsteps, lie on your skin. And if I was a river, I'd fall from your mountain, run by your doorpost so you could jump in. If I could hold the sea in my heart and hands, I'd pour love on you like only heaven can. If I was rain, if I was water, I couldn't fall any harder for you, baby, 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 for you, for you, baby, 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 for you.
That's lovely. That's
thanks.
lovely.
I messed it up.
Well, I couldn't tell. But so who did you write that with, and who did you write that for?
I wrote it with John Bettis, and he wrote songs for the Carpenters. He wrote "I Like a Man with a Slow Hand." He's kind of actually went on Broadway and very well known songwriter, and actually. Tim McGraw was going to cut it. It was on his list, and then a guy named Stephen Whitson cut it. But the reason it made me think of that is he was such a curious guy. As it popped in my head, we were talking about. He was he didn't play, so when you would write with John, he would kind of smoke his pipe, and he was into Carl Jung and all these sort of Jungian archetypes and stuff.
Wow.
So he would lay back on his couch with his pipe, and you would write. And, That's what I was saying was so cool about being new and in Nashville and all that is that you start out and you're kind of you're as it should be. You're on the they tell you to go right with this and that, and you're sort of like obliging the schedule and everything. Sure. And lots of times you don't know who these folks are, and it's kind of you have to move through the fear. Yeah. And just kind of like Roger Cook, who wrote Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress, and he wrote I'd Love to Teach the World to Sing.
Oh, really? He wrote that?
And he writes everything on a ukulele. Really? And so it's kind of in Nashville and Music Row there, and going in an office and just really kind of, nervous, and meet this guy. He walks in with this little thing. I was like, what the heck's he got in there? And it's like I'm just in. Someone that wrote Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress on a ukulele is immediately a hero of mine, Wow. So you just, this notion of sort of, channelized curiosity made me think of John Bettis.
Oh, that's great. The last few years you have, you've taken on a lot. And I have to say, sometimes I worry about you because you take on so much. It seems like people come to you. I mean, obviously there are lots of people out there who have drug and alcohol problems now. I mean, it's always been an epidemic, but it seems even bigger now. And I'm sure that every day somebody comes to you and with just a tale of woe and problems and insurmountable problems.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that?
Well, I keep it daily, and you know, it is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Knowing that I've got folks like you praying for me helps me a lot, and you're always kind enough to call and check on me. It is overwhelming, drinking from a fire hose a lot of times, because you really don't typically get a call of every call is pretty much a red alert call.
Yeah.
So dealing with everything in the day, knowing that I'm pretty equipped to deal with this, but knowing that there's something in it, unless someone really kind of does the hermeneutics on it. I mean, I was really called to do this. God called me to do this ministry, which God doesn't call you to do something that He doesn't equip you to do. It doesn't say it's going to be smooth or any of that.
Sure.
So I have a real powerful sense of serenity in knowing that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. That being said, the emergencies that are constantly going on, and plus the fact that there's not if you try to do the data on it, if you look at things as being this is a success or this is a failure, you can really become kind of ill-disposed towards it.
Right.
But when you realize the miracles that are happening all the time, and when you realize that that grace is something that can move into someone's life in any sort of situation they're in, and change their lives, it gives me a sense of hope and serenity. Plus, I don't think it's ironic that I'm sitting here with a guitar in my hand telling you this, because if I didn't have this component, the music component, when I was telling earlier that I'll go to the piano and I'm always writing songs, I, by the grace of God, as being a songwriter, I can phase pretty quickly, if I can phase into this world of music to where that stuff's not there. If I didn't have that, I couldn't do it. I'd crumble, and I'd really end up not being able to maintain it.
Sure.
So to answer your question, I keep it in the day. Mm-hmm. I make sure that I have a great team of folks around me, and the folks at St. John's and the Church Health Center and at Memphis Theological Seminary. I have a team of folks that I've learned in the last about 5 years to delegate and to say the word no.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to do.
Sure,
it really was hard. So, I mean, to me, it's kind of what I do, and it's what I'm called to do, and I'm thankful to be able to do it. And there's so many kind of amazing sort of narratives. I mean, I know you're a narrative guy, and just the some of the stories, and what this ministry's allowed me to do is to listen. And most all I do, Willie, is listen. Yeah. And folks have a real desire to tell their story, and I've learned to honor silence. And I typically, years ago, Willie, if we were in this conversation, I would always, if there was a silence, think I needed to fill that silence. Mm-hmm. But silence is the most, I think, important part of any sort of relationship and conversation, and any music. You have to, if just the notes kind of were flung together, there wasn't any silence. So I've learned to become a good listener. Mm-hmm. And typically, if you'll let someone talk, that's therapeutic anyway. Yeah. And so it's kind of like I've learned to slow down a little bit and not think that I've got to have my fingerprints on everything. That that God created the world out of chaos, and if we think that it's not going to be chaotic, then we're not living in the real world. So. It's a daily thing, a daily process.
Well, and I should mention here for people who are watching this that you have a ministry called The Way, and it's at St. John's Methodist Church, which is at the corner of Bellevue and Peabody.
That's right.
And you've been doing this for how many years?
For 5 years, every Friday at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
I mean, and I say this with all sincerity, the best musicians in town are there between 6 and 7, and it's the best music that's going on in that hour. And you know, we unabashedly talk about the 12 steps. Each week we'll talk about one of them, and then we'll have music, and then I will talk about the spiritual component of the 12 steps. The 12 steps, you know, ironically enough, you know, everyone knows that lots of the AA and NA and all these sort of methodologies of recovery, they get stigmatized, which, you know, it's natural that happens. But ironically, the 12 steps get stigmatized too, and the 12 steps are simply, they're simply a spiritual discipline, a way to prompt a spiritual experience in your life.
Right.
So I found through my own experience and a lot of other folks' experiences too, that working the steps is one thing, but if you don't really get that sort of notion of having a moment of God's grace in your life, you're pretty much inclined, well, you might not drink or drug, but you'll be miserable.
Yeah.
So
sure.
you know, we want you know, we want folks to have a life of joy. We say we're not a glum lot, you know.
Yeah.
And what we kind of learn is that for the most part, people don't necessarily have a drinking or drugging problem. They have a living problem.
Yes.
And so eventually, by reducing these other things, it's that we talked about earlier. This notion of, okay, what am I going to do with this moment? In this is this a low pressure system where something greater than I can move into this area here? And then the answer to that's yes, if you will let it. You know.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I think you have to be willing. I think you have to be willing, and you know, and just the fact that you know, nobody is completely lost.
That's right.
That anybody can change their situation.
Yeah.
And I think that so many people struggle with this. I think probably everybody watching this has had a family member, a friend, maybe themselves, whoever. Somebody has had problems here, and it is a living problem.
It is, and you know, it's a matter of equipping too. I mean, it's so amazing the things that have happened. I mean, just through this ministry, for instance, and through, you know, friends, and then in Dr. Morris and the Church Health Center now at Memphis Theological Seminary, where I'm on staff now. I'm the director of what's called the Church Health Center for Recovery Studies, which is equipping ministers to deal with this problem. And the reason that this was actually created was out of a need, a necessity. I was getting calls, not just the ones that you would expect, but from ministers saying, hey, someone that was in my congregation where their son OD'd on heroin, he's alive, he's in the emergency center, and so they end up calling me, and I'm like, you're a minister and you're not dealing in that moment? Because ministry happens in that moment.
Sure.
So we've now created a Center for Recovery Studies at the seminary where all the ministers that are coming through there are going to be equipped to deal with this situation. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that in these classes, Willie, it's like when people start studying these steps in this nomenclature, they realize that, hey, this stuff, you know, this stuff, we're all in recovery from something.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
yes,
It's like
yes.
we've all got a God-sized hole in our hearts. Our Emily Dickinson even put it more eloquently. She says, narcotics cannot steal the tooth that nibbles at the soul. So it's well there, you know, and so it's a matter of what are you going to do with this?
Which kind of begs the question, the whole idea of anonymity. How do you fall on that? Because it seems to me that a lot of where people's problems lie in that people sweep things under the rug. I don't want to hurt so-and-so's feelings. I don't want to do this. Let's don't bring this out in the open. Please don't tell so-and-so that I'm drinking. Please don't. All this. That whole issue of anonymity, I don't understand why it's so important.
Well, it's the spiritual anonymity is the spiritual foundation of the program, and for all the obvious reasons. And I honor the anonymity. For instance, on Friday nights, I mean, I'm constantly saying, turn those cameras off.
Right.
And everyone, if you've got Steve Selvage, Joe Restivo, and all these great players, Tony Thomas, and the list goes on and on. They're like, hey, I want to get this on my. And I'm like, no, we don't have any filming on Friday nights. And there's the sort of obvious reasons of anonymity because people talk. Now, I've been sort of drug over the coals on a lot of these things because from some perspectives, I mean, what I'm doing right now is sort of breaking a lot of the traditions of the program, because I'm really not supposed to in sort of press, radio, to talk about this. But I had to make a personal decision that even though I'm very introverted, I'm a very private person, a lot of people know who I am, and so if I can do anything in any sort of medium to help someone that might be suffering from this disease, then I'm going to do it, because this is kind of the way that for me that it works. I mean,
Right.
Listen, it's like I would rather talk about Dante or William Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury. I'd rather trace the organic metaphors in The Sound and Fury than to sit here and talk about my wounds and this stuff. But this is what I'm called to do, and I'm going to unabashedly do it, and no matter what. And I'm going to do it though with joy in my heart. I mean, I have a good time with this stuff.
Yeah, of course.
And I love the people that I meet, but it's serious. It's real serious stuff.
Yeah.
And people are dying all the time. Or what's worse, like I was talking before, I've experienced stuff that's really worse than dying.
Yeah.
So I know what that's like. And if there's any way that I could do anyone or train anyone to able to get this make people realize that this is a disease, and it's stigmatized, but there's help. But there's a lot of work in this help too.
Sure.
We're not going to grab the rope for you. You know. But I mean, like you allowing me to come here and do that. When you called me, and I knew that we would it would come around to this, and I appreciate you for allowing me the opportunity to do this. This is what I do.
Well, you are a bright light, in this community, and for so many people, and believe me, there are going to be people watching who need those words. They may not have heard that from anybody. And they need to hear that. I guess with that, we're probably going to wrap it up here. I'd love for you to sing another song. Sing us a happy song out.
All right. I love pretty women, came till I went. Attempted suicide, but the barrel was bent. I gave her my confession to a Tibetan priest. But you ain't done nothing until you've been kicked in the head by the Jackson police. Well, I've been to the river, I watched it flow, I climbed the mountain, felt the wind blow. I dropped my anchor in the guts of the sea. But you ain't done nothing till you've been kicked in the head by the Jackson police.
You're watching WYPL TV 18, a broadcast service of the Memphis Public Library and the City of Memphis.